My dad died suddenly, and my mom's new husband moved in the next week, but I found proof he poisoned him. Dad collapsed in the kitchen on a Thursday morning while making his famous blueberry pancakes. One second he was flipping them with that stupid spatula shaped like a fish, humming some old Eagles song, and the next second he was on the floor convulsing. His eyes rolled back and foam came out of his mouth. I screamed for Mom and she came running in her bathrobe, hair still wet from the shower. She dropped to her knees next to him, shouting his name over and over while I stood frozen by the doorway, my backpack still on my shoulders because I'd been about to leave for school. The ambulance came within 8 minutes, but it felt like hours. The paramedics worked on him right there on our kitchen floor, doing chest compressions and hooking up machines with wires everywhere. They loaded him onto a stretcher, and one of them kept saying, "massive cardiac event," into his radio. Mom rode with him in the ambulance, and our neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, drove me to the hospital. I sat in her car smelling her vanilla air freshener and watching the ambulance's lights disappear ahead of us. Dad died before we even got there. The doctor said it was a heart attack, sudden and catastrophic. He said sometimes these things just happen, even to relatively healthy men in their early 40s. Dad had been tired lately, complaining about heartburn and feeling foggy, but he'd blamed it on stress from his new promotion at work. The doctor said those were classic warning signs we should have caught. Mom sobbed into her hands while the doctor talked, and I just sat there numb, staring at the motivational poster on the wall about living each day like it's your last. The funeral was 5 days later. Mom was like a zombie through the whole thing, barely speaking, just nodding when people offered condolences. Our house filled up with casseroles and sympathy cards. I kept expecting Dad to walk through the door saying it was all a mistake, but he never did. His coffin was closed because Mom said she wanted to remember him as he was, not pale and wrong in a funeral home. I didn't argue even though I wanted to see him one more time, wanted proof that he was really gone and this wasn't some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. What happened next should have been my first clue something was wrong. Exactly 6 days after the funeral, Mom came into my room and told me we were having a guest for dinner. She was wearing makeup for the first time since Dad died, and she'd done her hair. I asked who was coming and she got this weird look on her face, half guilty and half defiant. She said his name was Kenneth, and he was an old friend from college who'd heard about Dad and wanted to check on us. I thought it was nice that someone cared enough to visit. Kenneth showed up at 7 with wine and flowers, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in our modest suburban home. He was tall and had this perfect smile that showed too many teeth, and when he shook my hand, his palm was cold and slightly damp. He kept touching Mom's shoulder and back during dinner, these casual touches that lasted just a second too long. I watched him cut his steak with surgical precision, every piece exactly the same size. He asked me questions about school, but I could tell he didn't actually care about my answers, just waited for me to stop talking so he could go back to talking to Mom. After Kenneth left that night, Mom sat me down on the couch with her hands folded in her lap, like she was about to deliver bad news. She said Kenneth had been very kind to her during a difficult time, that he'd been calling every day to check on her, that he understood grief in a way most people didn't because his own wife had died 3 years ago from cancer. I said that was sad, but I didn't understand why she was telling me this now. That's when she dropped the bomb. She said Kenneth had asked her to dinner, a real dinner, just the two of them. I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, I asked if she was seriously talking about dating someone when Dad had been dead for less than 2 weeks. She got defensive immediately, saying I was too young to understand how lonely she was, how much she needed support, how Dad would want her to be happy. I walked out of the room before I said something I'd regret, but I heard her crying behind me and felt guilty even though I knew I was right to be upset. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. Kenneth started coming over every single day after that, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to sit with Mom on the porch drinking wine and talking in low voices. He'd bring her gifts, expensive things like designer handbags and jewelry that we definitely couldn't afford on Dad's life insurance payout. When I asked Mom where all this stuff was coming from, she said Kenneth was just generous, that he had money and liked to share it with people he cared about. 3 weeks after Dad died, Mom told me Kenneth was moving in. Not asking, telling. She said he'd sold his condo and it made sense financially for him to stay with us while he looked for a new place. She said it was temporary, just until he found something suitable. I knew that was a lie the second she said it. Kenneth moved in on a Saturday with barely any belongings, just 3 suitcases and some boxes of books. He took over Dad's side of the closet that same day. I watched from my bedroom doorway as Mom helped him hang up his suits where Dad's flannel shirts used to be. She donated all of Dad's clothes the week before, said it was too painful to look at them. Now Kenneth's expensive Italian leather shoes sat in the exact spot where Dad's work boots had been. Kenneth had rules. He didn't call them that, just suggestions about how the household should run more smoothly. Dinner at exactly 6:30 every night, no phones at the table, no loud music after 9 p.m. He reorganized the kitchen so everything was in different cabinets, said Mom's system was inefficient. He threw out half the food in the fridge, called it unhealthy garbage that was probably what caused Dad's heart attack in the first place. That comment made me want to punch him, but I bit my tongue. Mom just nodded along with everything he said like she was hypnotized. The weirdest part was how comfortable he was, like he'd been living here for years instead of days. He knew where everything was without asking, had opinions about which grocery store had the best produce, suggested changing the internet provider because ours was too slow. It felt wrong, like he was erasing Dad one small detail at a time. I started spending more time in my room just to avoid him. Every time I came downstairs he was there, sitting in Dad's chair, drinking from Dad's favorite mug, talking about plans for the house like it was his. Mom seemed happy though, or at least less sad, so I tried to keep my mouth shut for her sake. School became my escape. I'd leave early and come home late, claiming I had clubs or study groups when really I just sat in the library trying to forget that Kenneth was sleeping in my dad's bed. My best friend Waverly knew something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to explain it. How do you tell someone your mom moved a strange man into your house a month after your dad died? It sounded insane even in my own head. But Waverly was persistent. kept asking if I was okay until I finally broke down and told her everything during lunch one day. She looked horrified, said that was really weird, and maybe I should talk to a school counselor. I laughed bitterly and said what would I tell them? That my mom was dating too soon? That her boyfriend made me uncomfortable? Those weren't crimes. Waverly squeezed my hand and said I could stay at her place anytime I needed a break. That offer meant more than she knew. Having somewhere to escape to, even temporarily, made the situation slightly more bearable. Things got stranger about 6 weeks after Dad died. I came home from school one day to find Kenneth in Dad's office, going through his desk drawers. I asked what he was doing, and he jumped like I'd caught him doing something wrong, then quickly recovered and said he was just organizing. Said Mom had asked him to clean out the office so she could turn it into a craft room. That was bullshit because Mom had never crafted anything in her life. But before I could call him on it, he pulled out a folder and handed it to me. He said these were some papers I might want to keep, old report cards and drawings from when I was little. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he watched me flip through them. I took the folder and left, but something about the interaction bothered me. Why was Kenneth going through Dad's things? What was he looking for? I decided to check the office myself the next day when he was at his mysterious job that he never talked about. I'd wait until he left the house and then search the desk to see what he'd been doing. The thought of touching Dad's things made my chest tight, but I needed to know what Kenneth was up to. The next morning, I faked being sick so I could stay home from school. Mom believed it immediately because I'd been so quiet and withdrawn lately. Probably thought I was finally processing grief. Kenneth left at 9:30 in his BMW, and Mom left 10 minutes later for her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. I waited another 15 minutes to make sure they weren't coming back, then went straight to Dad's office. The room still smelled like his cologne even though it had been weeks. His coffee mug was still on the desk, long since cleaned but forever marked with a faint ring where he'd set it down 1,000 times. I started with the desk drawers Kenneth had been searching. Most of them were empty now, cleaned out, but in the very back of the bottom drawer I found something Kenneth had missed. A small leather journal, the kind Dad used to keep for work notes. I pulled it out and flipped it open. The entries were dated, starting about 4 months before he died. The first few pages were normal work stuff, meeting notes and project deadlines, but then the tone changed. Dad had written feeling strange lately, tired all the time, heartburn worse, and asked Kenneth about the supplement he recommended, says it should help with stress. My blood went cold. Kenneth had been giving Dad supplements? I kept reading. The entries got more concerning. Supplement making me feel worse? Kenneth says it's normal. Body adjusting to new vitamins. Can't think straight at work. And then, 3 weeks before Dad died, found empty bottle in trash, looked up the label online. Not a supplement. Some kind of heart medication? Why would Kenneth give me heart medication? And finally, the last entry, dated 2 days before Dad collapsed. Confronted Kenneth yesterday at coffee shop. He laughed it off, said I was reading the label wrong, but I know what I saw. Going to doctor tomorrow to get blood test, see what's in my system. Kenneth looked worried when I told him. Lauren doesn't believe me, says I'm being paranoid. Maybe I am, but something feels wrong. There were no more entries after that. Dad died before he could get that blood test. I sat on the floor of his office holding the journal with shaking hands, reading those last words over and over. Kenneth had been poisoning Dad. That's why the heart attack was so sudden. That's why Dad had been feeling sick for months. And Kenneth had known, had laughed when Dad confronted him. I took photos of every page with my phone, making sure the images were clear. Then I put the journal back exactly where I'd found it, deep in the drawer where Kenneth must have missed it during his search. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do with this information. I couldn't go to Mom. She was clearly under Kenneth's spell and wouldn't believe me. The police? What would I tell them? That I found a journal with unproven accusations about supplements? They'd say it wasn't evidence, just a sick man's paranoid delusions before a natural heart attack. I needed more proof, something concrete that would force people to take me seriously. I decided to start by searching Kenneth's things, see if I could find the bottle Dad had written about or anything else suspicious. Kenneth had moved into the guest room temporarily, said he didn't want to rush things with Mom even though they were clearly already together. His belongings were still mostly packed in those 3 suitcases. I felt gross going through someone else's stuff, but I kept thinking about Dad's journal entries, about how Kenneth had laughed when confronted. This man had killed my father and now he was sleeping in our house. I had to do something. Kenneth's suitcases were in the guest room closet, tucked behind winter coats. I pulled them out one at a time, listening for any sound of someone coming home. The first suitcase was just clothes, expensive button-downs, and perfectly creased slacks. The second had more clothes and some toiletries, fancy brands I'd never heard of. The third suitcase was locked. I tried to force it open, but the clasp was solid metal and wouldn't budge. I needed something to pick the lock, but I'd never done anything like that before. I was about to give up when I remembered a YouTube video Waverly had shown me once about opening suitcase locks with a ballpoint pen. It seemed ridiculous, but I grabbed a pen from Dad's office and tried it anyway. I jammed the pen into the zipper track and pushed hard, and to my shock, the zipper separated. The suitcase popped open. Inside I found a laptop, several folders full of documents, and a small box that rattled when I picked it up. I opened the box. Inside were at least 30 prescription pill bottles, all with different names on the labels. None of them said Kenneth. I took photos of every label, my hands shaking so badly some of the pictures came out blurry. These were medications prescribed to different people whose names I didn't recognize. Why would Kenneth have all these pills? I was shoving everything back into the suitcase when I heard a car door slam outside. My heart stopped. I zipped the suitcase closed, tried to force the broken zipper to look normal, and shoved it back in the closet. I just pulled the winter coats over it when I heard the front door open. Kenneth's voice called out, asking if anyone was home. I held my breath, frozen in the guest room with guilt written all over my face. Heavy footsteps came up the stairs and I knew I was trapped. I couldn't get to my room without passing the staircase where Kenneth would see me. The guest room door was open and I was standing right next to the closet like a complete idiot. Kenneth appeared in the doorway and his eyes went from confused to calculating in about half a second. He asked what I was doing home, thought I had school today. I stammered that I wasn't feeling well, came home early. He looked at the closet, then back at me, and something dark crossed his face. He said it was funny. He'd come home because he forgot something important, and now here I was standing in his room. His tone made it clear he didn't believe my excuse. He asked if I needed anything from his closet, said it in this friendly way that felt like a threat. I shook my head and tried to walk past him, but he grabbed my arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me. Kenneth's face was very close to mine, and I could smell coffee on his breath. He said he knew this situation was hard for me, losing my dad so suddenly, having a new person in the house. He said he wasn't trying to replace Dad, just trying to help my mom through a difficult time. But he also said we all needed to respect boundaries, and going through people's private things wasn't respectful. I tried to pull my arm away, but his grip tightened just slightly. He asked if I understood what he was saying. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He let me go, and I practically ran to my room, locking the door behind me. My whole body was shaking, and I felt like I might throw up. Kenneth knew I'd been in his stuff, which meant he'd checked that suitcase and realized I'd broken the lock. Would he know I saw the pills? Would he do something about it? I pulled out my phone and looked at the photos I'd taken, zooming in on the prescription labels. Most of them were for heart medication, blood thinners, things that would be dangerous in the wrong doses. But why would Kenneth have pills prescribed to other people? Unless he was collecting them for a reason. Unless he'd done this before. The thought made me sick. What if Dad wasn't Kenneth's first victim? I spent the rest of that day in my room, too afraid to come out even when Mom called me for dinner. I texted her that I had food poisoning and couldn't eat. She bought it without question, said she'd check on me later. Around midnight, I heard them talking in the hallway outside my door. Kenneth's voice was low and smooth, saying something about teenage rebellion being normal. Mom laughed quietly and said I'd been so difficult lately. She didn't know what to do with me. Kenneth said maybe I needed some time away, suggested a boarding school he knew that specialized in helping troubled teens process grief. My blood ran cold. He was trying to get rid of me, send me away so I couldn't interfere. Mom actually seemed to be considering it, said maybe some structure would be good for me. I listened to them discuss my future like I wasn't even a person, just a problem to be solved. When their voices faded toward their bedroom, I grabbed my phone and started Googling Kenneth's name along with death and wife. Dad's journal said Kenneth's wife died 3 years ago from cancer. But what if that wasn't the whole story? The search results were limited, but I found an obituary for Patricia Whitmore. Died at age 38 after a brief illness. Survived by her husband Kenneth. No mention of cancer, just brief illness. I dug deeper, found old social media posts from Patricia's friends asking questions, saying they were shocked that Patricia had seemed healthy just weeks before. One comment from someone named Deborah stood out. Still can't believe she's gone. We had lunch 2 months ago and she was fine. She said she'd been feeling tired, but Kenneth convinced her it was just stress. Then suddenly she's in the hospital with organ failure. Something doesn't add up. Other people had replied telling Deborah to stop spreading rumors, that grief makes people say crazy things. But what if Deborah was right? What if Kenneth had done to Patricia exactly what he'd done to Dad? I screenshotted everything and saved it to a cloud account Kenneth couldn't access. Then I started searching for more of Kenneth's history. Found his LinkedIn profile showing he'd lived in 4 different states over the past 10 years, moving every 2 to 3 years. That was suspicious for someone who supposedly had a stable career in pharmaceutical sales. Why move so often? I decided I needed help. Real help from someone who might actually believe me. I thought about Waverly but didn't want to drag her into something potentially dangerous. Then I remembered Dad's best friend Garrett, who'd given a speech at the funeral about what a good man Dad was. Garrett was a lawyer, and Dad had trusted him completely. I found his number in Mom's phone when she left it charging in the kitchen the next morning. I texted him from my phone pretending to be a potential client, asked if he did consultations. He responded within an hour saying yes, and I set up a meeting for after school on Friday. I told Mom I was going to Waverly's house, and she barely looked up from her phone where she was texting Kenneth. The distance between us had grown so wide I wasn't sure we'd ever fix it. She'd chosen Kenneth over believing anything might be wrong, over even considering that Dad's death was suspicious. Maybe she was in denial, or maybe Kenneth had really manipulated her that completely. Either way, I was on my own. Friday came and I took the bus to Garrett's office in downtown. The building was tall and made of glass, very corporate and intimidating. I almost turned around but forced myself to go inside. Garrett's assistant showed me into his office and he looked surprised to see me. He stood up and came around his desk, asking if everything was okay, if Mom knew I was here. I shook my head and said no, Mom couldn't know about this meeting. Then I pulled out my phone and showed him everything. Dad's journal entries, photos of Kenneth's pills, the information about Patricia's death, the suspicious moves every few years. Garrett's expression changed from concern to serious as he scrolled through the images. He asked me to start from the beginning and tell him everything. So I did. I told him about Kenneth moving in immediately, about going through Dad's office, about finding the journal. I told him about the suitcase full of medications and Kenneth catching me in his room. I told him about Mom talking about sending me to boarding school. When I finished, Garrett was quiet for a long time. Then he said what I'd found was concerning but not conclusive proof of anything criminal. He said a journal entry about supplements wasn't evidence of poisoning, especially with no autopsy showing anything unusual in Dad's system. The pills could be explained away as part of Kenneth's job in pharmaceutical sales. The quick relationship was weird but not illegal. I felt my hope deflating, but Garrett held up his hand, said he wasn't done. He said what we needed was concrete evidence, and there was one way to potentially get it. He could request Dad's medical records from the hospital, see if there were any tests done that might show abnormal toxicology. He could also hire a private investigator to look into Kenneth's background more thoroughly, see if there was a pattern of suspicious deaths around him. But he warned me this would take time and money, and there was no guarantee we'd find anything. He asked if I was absolutely sure I wanted to pursue this, because once we started, there'd be no going back. If Kenneth found out we were investigating him, things could get dangerous. I thought about Dad's last journal entry, about how he'd been going to get a blood test and never made it. I thought about Mom being completely under Kenneth's control. I told Garrett I was sure. I needed to know the truth even if it destroyed everything. He nodded and said he'd work on it, but I needed to be extremely careful at home. Don't confront Kenneth. Don't let him know I suspect anything. Just act normal until we had enough evidence to go to the police. That was going to be the hardest part, pretending everything was fine while living under the same roof as my father's killer. The next few weeks were torture. I had to sit across from Kenneth at dinner, smile when he told jokes, act like a normal grumpy teenager instead of someone who knew his secret. He watched me constantly with these calculating eyes like he was trying to figure out how much I knew. Mom was completely oblivious, planning a wedding for the following summer. She showed me photos of dresses and venues, asking my opinion, and I had to pretend like I was okay with her marrying Dad's murderer less than a year after his death. I wanted to scream at her, shake her, make her see what Kenneth really was, but Garrett had warned me to stay quiet until we had proof. So I nodded at the dress photos and said they were nice and died a little inside every time. Waverly knew something was wrong, but I couldn't tell her the details. Just said family stuff was complicated. She stopped pushing, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I was losing weight because I barely ate, couldn't sleep because nightmares woke me up every night. In my dreams, Dad was alive and trying to warn me about Kenneth, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. I'd wake up gasping and check my phone for any updates from Garrett, but there was never anything new. Finally, 6 weeks after our first meeting, Garrett called me to his office again. This time he had a folder on his desk, and his expression was grim. He said the private investigator had found something. Kenneth's real name was Kenneth Whitmore Davis, and he'd been using just Kenneth Whitmore after his wife died, possibly to avoid people connecting him to Patricia's death. But before Patricia, there had been another wife. Stephanie Davis died 5 years ago at age 41 from a sudden heart attack, just like Dad. The investigator dug deeper and found that Stephanie had complained to friends about feeling sick for months before she died, said her husband was giving her supplements to help with fatigue. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Garrett opened the folder and showed me death certificates, medical records he'd obtained through legal channels, police reports. Stephanie's death had been ruled natural causes. Patricia's death was listed as organ failure from complications of an unnamed illness. Dad's death was a massive heart attack. All 3 people were healthy before they met Kenneth, and all 3 died within a year of being in a relationship with him. The pattern was clear. Kenneth was a serial killer who used his pharmaceutical knowledge to slowly poison his partners, probably for life insurance money or inheritance. Garrett said he'd taken all this information to the police, but they were hesitant to open an investigation based on circumstantial evidence. They said the deaths were years apart in different states, all ruled natural causes at the time, and the journal entries weren't enough to prove poisoning without toxicology reports showing actual poison in the victims' systems. The frustrating part was that Dad, Stephanie, and Patricia had all been cremated, so there were no bodies to exhume and test. Kenneth had made sure of that. But Garrett had one more piece of information that changed everything. The private investigator had followed Kenneth for the past month and documented him meeting with a woman in her 50s at various restaurants and coffee shops. The woman's name was Monica Torres, and she'd recently lost her husband to cancer. Kenneth was already grooming his next victim, just like he'd groomed Mom, and Monica had a daughter about my age. The thought of Kenneth doing to another family what he'd done to mine made me feel sick. We had to stop him somehow, had to get evidence that would stick. Garrett said there might be one way. If we could get a sample of whatever Kenneth was using to poison people, we could have it tested and prove it was dangerous. But getting that sample meant I'd have to go back into his things. I told Garrett I'd do it, whatever it took. He looked uncomfortable, said he couldn't officially condone a minor breaking into someone's room and stealing potential evidence. But unofficially, if I happened to find something and bring it to him, he'd make sure it got to the right people. We both knew what he was really saying. I had to be the one to get the evidence because any adult doing it would make it inadmissible in court. I went home that night with a plan forming in my head. Kenneth and Mom had a date night every Friday. They'd leave around 7 and usually didn't get back until 11 or midnight. That gave me 4 to 5 hours to search Kenneth's things properly. I'd start with that suitcase again, see if there were any pills left, or if he'd moved them after catching me before. I'd check his laptop if I could get past the password. I'd go through every pocket of every piece of clothing he owned if I had to. Friday couldn't come fast enough. I spent the days leading up to it pretending everything was normal, even as Kenneth seemed to watch me more intently than ever. Did he know I was planning something? Could he sense it? At dinner on Thursday, he asked how school was going, and I said fine. Then he asked if I'd given any thought to that boarding school. Mom jumped in saying we should at least tour it, see if I liked the campus. I felt trapped between them, both smiling at me like this was a normal family discussion, instead of Kenneth trying to isolate me so he could move forward with whatever his plan was for Mom. I said I'd think about it, knowing I had no intention of going anywhere. I just needed them to believe I was considering it, needed Kenneth to lower his guard for one night. Friday finally arrived, and I made a show of telling Mom I'd be at Waverly's all evening, studying for a big test. She barely acknowledged me, too busy getting ready for her date. Kenneth came downstairs in a suit that probably cost more than our mortgage payment, and he paused when he saw me in the kitchen. He said something about me being home alone, asked if I was sure I didn't want to come with them, or at least go to Waverly's like I'd said. I told him I'd changed my mind, was just going to study at home. He looked like he didn't believe me, but Mom was calling him from the car and he didn't have time to argue. He told me to lock the doors and set the alarm, said he'd check to make sure when they got home. It was a thinly veiled threat. He'd know if I'd been anywhere I wasn't supposed to be. I waved goodbye and watched them drive away, then waited another 20 minutes to make sure they weren't coming back for something forgotten. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the same clock that had marked the seconds of my entire childhood. I remembered Dad winding it every Sunday morning, his routine that had seemed boring then but precious now that he was gone. I couldn't let Kenneth get away with taking him from me. I headed upstairs to the guest room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Kenneth's things were more spread out now, some of them in the master bedroom with Mom's stuff. I started in the guest room closet where I'd found the suitcase before. It was gone. I checked under the bed, in the bathroom, even in the hallway closet. Nothing. Kenneth must have moved everything after he caught me the first time. I stood in the guest room feeling defeated, trying to think where else he might hide things. Then I remembered the master bedroom. I'd been avoiding it because it felt wrong, like a violation of what used to be my parents' space. But if Kenneth had moved his stuff in there, I didn't have a choice. I walked down the hall to their room and pushed open the door. The space looked different now. Some of Mom's things cleared out to make room for Kenneth's. His suits hung in the closet next to her dresses. His cologne bottles sat on the dresser where Dad's photos used to be. I felt anger burning in my chest as I started searching. I went through every drawer, every pocket, every shoebox. I checked the bathroom cabinets and under the sink. I even looked in the vents, remembering a movie where someone hid something there. Nothing. Where would Kenneth keep his pills? They had to be somewhere accessible, somewhere he could get to them easily but Mom wouldn't accidentally find them. Then I remembered Kenneth was meticulous about his morning routine. He got up at exactly 6:30, went for a run, came back and showered, then had breakfast. He brought his gym bag upstairs with him every morning and took it back down every evening. I'd never seen what was in that bag. I ran back downstairs to the garage where Kenneth parked his BMW. The gym bag was in the trunk. I pulled it out and unzipped it, my hands shaking. Inside were gym clothes, a water bottle, running shoes, and a small leather toiletry case. I opened the case and there they were. At least 20 pill bottles, all with different names, different dosages. But these weren't the same pills from before. These labels were newer, more recent prescriptions. I took photos of every single one, making sure the names and dates were visible. Then I noticed something else in the bag. A small notebook, similar to Dad's journal. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Inside were entries dated over the past 3 months, written in Kenneth's neat handwriting. Lists of medications and dosages, notes about reactions and timings, and names. Dad's name, with notes about how long it took for the symptoms to present. Patricia's name with similar observations. Stephanie's name. And at the bottom of the most recent page, a new name I recognized immediately. Monica Torres. Kenneth had documented every person he'd killed like they were science experiments. He'd written about adjusting dosages, changing medications, noting what worked fastest and what was less detectable. He'd written about Dad specifically. Subject more resistant than expected. Increased dosage, but target became suspicious. May have compromised timeline. Need to be more careful with next subject. Reading those words about my father, about the man who raised me and loved me, reduced to subject and target, made me want to vomit. But I forced myself to keep taking photos, to document every single page of Kenneth's murder journal. This was the evidence we needed. This was proof that could put him away forever. I was on the last page when I heard a car door slam. My blood turned to ice. They were home early. I shoved the journal back into the toiletry case, zipped the gym bag, and threw it back in the trunk as quietly as I could. But I'd left the trunk open. I slammed it closed just as the garage door started opening. I ran for the door into the house, slipping through it just as the automatic garage light came on. I heard Kenneth's voice saying something about grabbing his jacket, heard Mom laughing. They'd come home and he'd remembered he left something in the car. I sprinted up the stairs as quietly as possible and dove into my room, closing the door just as I heard them come inside. My heart was beating so fast I thought I might pass out. I sat on my bed trying to control my breathing, listening to them moving around downstairs. Kenneth called up asking if I was home and I yelled back yes, said I'd been studying and hadn't heard them come in. There was a pause, then his footsteps on the stairs. He knocked on my door and opened it without waiting for permission. He looked around my room like he was searching for evidence of something, then his eyes landed on me. He asked what I'd been studying and I grabbed the nearest textbook, stammered something about math. He stared at me for a long moment and I wondered if he could somehow tell I'd just been in his car, if guilt was written all over my face. Then he said goodnight and closed the door. I heard him walk to the master bedroom, heard a closet door open. Was he checking his gym bag? Would he notice I'd moved things slightly? I grabbed my phone and texted Garrett the photos I'd taken, sending them as fast as my shaking fingers could manage. If Kenneth figured out what I'd done and something happened to me, at least Garrett would have the evidence. At least Dad would get justice even if I didn't survive to see it. The text went through one by one, that satisfying delivered notification appearing under each image. I deleted the photos from my phone after confirming Garrett received them, then deleted the deleted photos too. I couldn't risk Kenneth finding them if he took my phone again. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound made me jump. Every creak of the house settling sounded like footsteps coming to my room. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Garrett. It said, "Holy shit, this is it. Coming over tomorrow to talk to your mom and call police. Do not let Kenneth know you found this. Be careful." I replied that Kenneth and Mom had a brunch thing tomorrow at 11. They'd be gone for at least 2 hours. Garrett said he'd come by at 11:15. I just had to survive until then. Had to act completely normal for a few more hours. Morning came eventually, and I dragged myself out of bed looking like I hadn't slept, which was true. Mom asked if I was okay, and I blamed it on the math test I'd supposedly been studying for. Kenneth watched me eat breakfast with those calculating eyes. He asked if I'd seen his gym bag, said he could have sworn he'd left it in a different position. My mouth went dry, but I kept chewing my cereal, said I hadn't touched his stuff. He nodded slowly and said, "Of course not. Why would I?" But there was an implication in his tone, a warning. Mom was oblivious to the tension, chattering about the brunch and did Kenneth want to visit that new art gallery after. They left at 10:45. Kenneth paused at the door and told me to stay out of trouble, and the way he said it made my skin crawl. I watched them drive away from the window, counting down the minutes until Garrett arrived. He showed up at exactly 11:15 with 2 police officers. I let them in and they sat in our living room looking at the photos on Garrett's laptop. The officers' expressions got more serious with each image. One of them, an older cop with gray hair, said this was some of the most damning evidence he'd seen in a long time. He said Kenneth's journal alone would be enough to reopen investigations into all 3 deaths, and the pills were concrete proof he was stockpiling medications inappropriately. Combined with the pattern of deaths around him, they had enough for an arrest warrant. The female officer asked me to tell them everything I knew, and I walked them through the entire story. Dad's journal, the suspicious deaths of Kenneth's previous wives, how quickly he'd moved in with Mom, the conversation I'd overheard about sending me away. Everything. They took notes and recorded my statement, and the male officer said I'd done an incredibly brave thing, but also an incredibly dangerous one. He said if Kenneth had caught me, I could have become his next victim. The thought made me feel sick, but it was worth it if it meant stopping him before he hurt Mom or Monica Torres. Garrett asked what happened next, and the officer said they needed to arrest Kenneth as soon as possible, before he had a chance to run. They asked if I knew where he was right now, and I gave them the address of the brunch place. They radioed for backup and told me to pack a bag, said I couldn't stay here alone in case Kenneth somehow got wind of the arrest and came back. Garrett said I could stay with him until things were sorted out. I was throwing clothes into a duffel bag when my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. My hands shook as I answered. She was screaming, hysterical, asking what I'd done and why police were arresting Kenneth at brunch in front of everyone. She said I was ruining her life, that Kenneth was a good man, and I was just a jealous teenager who couldn't accept Dad was gone. I tried to explain about the journal, about the evidence, but she wasn't listening. She just kept screaming until Kenneth's voice came through the phone, calm and cold. He said he knew I'd been in his things, said he'd underestimated me. He said I was smarter than he'd given me credit for, but not smart enough to know what I'd just done. He said Mom would never forgive me for this, that I'd destroyed our family. Then the line went dead. The officers said Kenneth was in custody, but Mom had refused to believe any of the accusations. She'd insisted on calling her lawyer to defend him. I felt hollow hearing that. Even with all the evidence, even with Kenneth's own words documenting his murders, Mom couldn't or wouldn't accept the truth. Maybe she was in too deep. Maybe Kenneth's manipulation had worked too well. Or maybe she just couldn't handle the reality that she'd brought Dad's killer into our home and almost married him. Garrett drove me to his house and his wife made up their guest room. She was kind and didn't ask too many questions. Just said I could stay as long as I needed. That night, I finally slept. Really slept. For the first time in weeks. Kenneth was locked up and couldn't hurt anyone. The next few days were a media circus. Reporters camped outside our house trying to get comments from Mom. The story hit local news. Pharmaceutical sales manager arrested for triple homicide. Kenneth's face was plastered everywhere. That practiced smile of his looking sinister now that everyone knew what he'd done. Mom hired an expensive lawyer to defend him, paying with money from Dad's life insurance. The irony was sickening. She refused to talk to me, wouldn't answer my calls. Garrett said she'd filed for temporary custody of me, but he'd countered with evidence of her impaired judgment given the circumstances. The court agreed I should stay with Garrett's family until things settled. Kenneth's arraignment was televised. He pleaded not guilty, his lawyer arguing that the journal was creative writing and the pills were samples from his job. But then the prosecution presented their evidence. They'd exhumed Stephanie's body from a memorial garden where her ashes had been scattered and found trace amounts of medications that shouldn't have been there. They'd tracked down multiple people who'd received prescriptions for the pills in Kenneth's possession, people who'd reported them stolen. They interviewed Monica Torres, who confirmed Kenneth had been pursuing her and had given her vitamins to help with grief. She'd been taking them for 2 weeks and had started feeling sick. The vitamins tested positive for the same heart medications that killed Dad. The evidence was overwhelming. Kenneth's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution wanted trial, wanted to make an example out of him. During the trial, which lasted 6 weeks, I had to testify. I sat in that witness box and told the jury everything about finding Dad's journal, about Kenneth's suspicious behavior, about the photos and notebook. Kenneth stared at me the whole time with this expression that was almost disappointed, like I'd let him down by figuring out his game. His lawyer tried to paint me as a troubled teen acting out against my mom's new relationship, but the physical evidence backed up everything I said. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all 3 counts of murder. The courtroom erupted. I saw Monica Torres crying in relief, Patricia's family hugging each other. Stephanie's mother, who'd flown in from Arizona, actually thanked me afterward, said she'd known something was wrong but no one had believed her. Kenneth showed no emotion when they read the verdict, just stared straight ahead like this was all beneath him. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Mom wasn't at the sentencing. I'd heard from Garrett that she'd moved to her sister's house in another state, couldn't face anyone after the truth came out. I felt sorry for her despite everything. She'd been a victim of Kenneth's manipulation too, even if she'd enabled him by refusing to see the signs. I went back to our house for the first time in 4 months after the trial ended. It felt like a museum, everything frozen exactly as it had been. Mom's coffee cup still on the counter, Dad's reading glasses on the table. I walked through the rooms and said goodbye to the life we'd had before Kenneth destroyed it. Garrett helped me pack up things I wanted to keep and arranged to sell the house. The money would go into a trust for my college fund. I couldn't live there anymore, not with so many bad memories. I moved in permanently with Garrett and his wife Simone, who'd petitioned to become my legal guardians. Mom signed over custody without contest. Maybe she felt guilty, or maybe she just couldn't look at me without being reminded of how wrong she'd been. Either way, I was okay with it. I had a family that cared about me, even if it wasn't the one I'd been born into. Waverly's family sort of adopted me too, having me over for dinners and including me in their holidays. I'd lost my dad and essentially lost my mom, but I'd gained something else. The knowledge that I was strong enough to fight for the truth no matter how hard it was. Senior year came and went. I got accepted to college with scholarships. I visited Dad's grave every week and told him about my life, about how I'd gotten justice for him. Sometimes I felt like he could hear me, like he was proud. I hoped he was. Kenneth sent me a letter from prison about a year after his conviction. I almost threw it away without reading it, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page where he admitted everything in clinical detail. He said he'd started with Stephanie because she'd inherited money from her parents, and he needed cash to invest in a business opportunity. It was so easy, just a few pills, and no one questioned a middle-aged woman having a heart attack. Patricia had been even easier because she'd been on so many medications already for anxiety. He'd just swapped out her prescriptions with ones that would cause organ failure over time. With Dad, he'd gotten sloppy because he was rushing. Wanted to get the life insurance quickly to fund his next move. He said he'd been planning to kill Mom eventually too, after her life insurance matured. Said I'd saved her life by figuring things out when I did. He ended the letter by saying he didn't regret what he'd done, only that he'd gotten caught. Reading those words made me realize there was no redemption for someone like Kenneth. No humanity left in him. He was a monster who saw people as marks, as sources of income. I burned the letter in Garrett's fireplace and never spoke about it to anyone. That chapter was closed. I graduated top of my class, gave a speech about resilience and finding truth in darkness. Mom came to graduation, sat in the back. We didn't talk, but she sent a card later with money and a short note saying she was sorry and proud of me. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Maybe someday we'd rebuild our relationship. Or maybe we wouldn't. Either way, I was okay. I'd survived the worst thing I could imagine and come out stronger. Dad would have liked the person I'd become. I carried his memory with me every day. A reminder that love doesn't die just because someone does. Justice had been served. Truth had won. And I'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who smile and act normal, who sit at your dinner table and pretend to care while plotting your destruction. But I'd also learned that one person, even a teenager, can make a difference when they refuse to ignore the truth. If you're still here, you're a true fan. Show some support with a like and subscribe to catch the next one.